Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I am your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real life stories on going personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Alice Atalanta. Alice is the founder of Atalanta Leadership Forge, a powerful leadership development organization rooted in resilience, authenticity, and action. With a background as a scholar, athlete, combat sports coach, and military advocate, Alice has worked with everyone from special operations veterans in law enforcement to young athletes and Fortune 500 executives. Her personal story, from surviving trauma and adversity to redefining strength on her own terms, has inspired a bold and transformative approach to leadership. Through her work, Alice helps individuals uncover blind spots, tap into their inner grit, and lead with purpose. Whether she's training CEOs, coaching female athletes, or supporting elite military communities, Alice is all about one thing: forging leadership that lasts. You can find Alice by going to her website, atalantaleadershipforge.com. Hello, Alice. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hi, Olivia. I'm so glad we got to sit down. This is awesome. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited and I want to dive right into things because there's so many different aspects we can talk about. To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Alice Atalanta?
I think success means and looks like what it means to the person I'm talking to. And I take a very individualistic approach to success because that's your why. I mean, that's the driving force behind everything you do, right? And so with success, we have to start with goals, and we have to start with a vision, and we have to start with a purpose. And there's a whole architecture there, but it's pretty straightforward. And once you get your feet wet, it's a lot of fun.
I like how you bring up once you get your feet wet, because that's always the first thing that moves the needle. I get asked a lot in podcasting or in different spaces, like, what's the first step? And I'm like, willing to take the first step. What you got to just be willing
Yes.
to dive in. So for you, as your journey weaves together through academia and athletics, combat sports, we could go on and on. How have you always taken that first step of getting your feet wet, especially when it might be a new space, it might be difficult, there's unknown that goes into it as well?
It's a good question. I think it's evolved throughout my life and with maturity at different times. My answer at 20, when I was snowboard racing, I would sometimes sit at the top of a hill for, 15, 20 minutes thinking about my game plan and just breathing and trying to get the courage to hit that jump. I don't think it was until probably my mid 30s when I started boxing that I realized the hardest part is just entering the flow. It truly is the first step. The hardest thing about boxing was the first time I set foot in a fight gym, and everything after that, the flow takes care of itself. Once you start to trust the process and find the right leaders and the right teammates. Um, that's the key habit, though.
And I love how you mentioned there it's a habit because it's not a one and done. You have to train yourself to be willing to step
Yeah.
into that, to go with that flow, the eds, finding your team, all those different aspects are habits we need to hone. So for you, as you're coaching and talking on stages about what you do, how do you make sure that people understand it's a habit?
I I I get very anecdotal when I'm talking to groups or when it's I like to be unscripted, as you can probably tell right now. And so there's always an example of somebody, and I always call those people learners. I call those people growers, and that always gets a lot of laughs from the crowd. But it really is people who've mastered the habit of mastery. And that's a habit. It's a pattern of understanding, what are you going for? Again, what's the why behind it? How are we going to approach this? How are we breaking this down? And once we go from there, I think is when things really take off.
So for you, what was it like understanding that it needed to be forged what you do now from habit? And what was that experience when you started and had pivoted and correct me if I'm wrong, from doing tasks to go, okay, I need to build this into a habit? Or did you always have that understanding that it took habit to create what you wanted to create?
I think that's a good question. In my life, I had many habits that were positive, many that were negative. When I hit this path again, about my mid-30s, when I started working with the special operations community, and that was the huge turning point for me, simply because that was the first time I really had this intimate access to really elite performers who were just the top of the top and had kept making it through these progressively more narrow filters of selection. And as I moved through that group and saw how they were living, what they were reading, what bits of wisdom that were being passed down through that community, but also how truly simple these principles were, I started to see it's not that it's hard. There were these myths that I had believed in my civilian life, that simple things should have been more complicated than they were. They're not complicated. Nutrition and diet, exercise, having a disciplined routine in your daily life, it's not difficult. It's not complex, but it can be challenging. And it's challenging to wake up every day and maintain that commitment. And that's where, when I started to see, wait a minute, this it's a formula, and we can apply this formula in different places. And it's not as complex or veiled in emotional baggage as we tend to make it out to be.
And that being said, you said you mentioned in your 30s and you redefined your strength on your own terms, especially while watching your daughter grow. How has that shifted the influence in the way you work with women and girls through Atalanta Leadership Forge? And what does authentic empowerment look like in those spaces today?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think what I started to process as I was really in this very male dominated world between the fight world, self defense, combat sports, and military special operations was I was seeing, well, I've always known men and women aren't all that different. You're an athlete, you have things you need to do. However, different leadership knowledge and different culture and different methodology and different almost mythology were being passed down on the male side that the girls weren't being given access to. And the key example of that for me was when I started as a boxer, I started to learn actual self-defense. And that obviously goes into being a trauma survivor and things like that. But realizing that as a girl growing up, you're probably too young for this, but there was a TV show called The Facts of Life about a bunch of girls at boarding school. It's a great show. So in one of them, it was one of those serious 80s after school specialty episodes of the show where they try to teach you a big life lesson. And one of the girls or someone on their campus is assaulted or grabbed at night. So they bring in a self-defense expert to teach the women self-defense. And they round them all up in the school. And he comes in his karate uniform. And he's like, you can always defend yourself. Let's look at your purse. What's in your purse? And he grabs someone's purse, dumps it out. And he's like, look, keys, a lollipop stick. That was my favorite. You're supposed to, it's like, we know women need to defend themselves, but we have this psychological block against anything that we find unpalatable to present to women. So let's just give them this fake lollipop answer instead of what we actually know. That was probably 1983 or 4 when they made that show. So we were well aware of what it actually takes to win a fight on that level. And it certainly takes more than a lollipop stick. So when I saw the difference, when I got in the gym with a Navy SEAL who now I currently work with all the time, but back then, and he showed me these techniques and these tactics and how to utilize weapons and things like that. And I went, holy smokes, this is what women actually need to keep us safer. Women are never going to be safer if we can't culturally accept these solutions. If we keep going running and thinking that we're just going to use our phone to call for help when that doesn't get the job done. And if it's happening in this life or death scenario, how many other places is it happening? So that's where my deep dive started to come in, where I was thinking, how are we coaching girls in athletics? What are we teaching girls at home? How are we talking to girls? And when you start to really go deep on that, you see things like, I just wrote a blog post about this, where some of these catchphrases that are popular in the women's community, like "I am enough," and I take pause with that, and I look at myself as a parent and say, well, would I teach that to my son? I assume that he understands that he's enough, but I'm going to teach that to my daughter. Maybe she ever never thought she wasn't enough until I told her that she needs to remind herself that she is enough. Who says I'm not enough? So that's the thrust behind the whole space of the Leadership Forge is I've got access to this kind of rarefied world of masculine achievement knowledge that doesn't tend to get translated and passed down through women's circles because of where it lives, because of the military world where it lives.
And that even made me think about so my boyfriend is a chief in the U.S. Coast Guard. I have other families members who've served who are men. And I remember when we were on our road trip to where we're living now, and even when we got here, one day my boyfriend just looks at me and he goes, "What is it like walking down the street and not worrying if anything's gonna happen?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You walk with such confidence and like knowing and trust that like nothing's going to happen." And I'm like, and I jokingly in real time was like, "Who's gonna mess with me? Like, try it and see what happens." Like, like that 5 foot redhead energy of like, yeah, come after me. And like, I got some tools in my toolbox, right? And when
Right.
my father and him met and like that story came up, my dad was like, "Yeah, why?" Because I have two younger sisters and my mom, obviously. And he's like, "Why do you think I've always, when we've gone on international trips, when we're, in big crowds, wherever it might be, I'm always walking behind the girls?" He's like, "It's not because like I want to be slower, because my dad's 6'3". He has a way bigger stride than the rest of us." He's like, "It's because if I'm behind them and something starts to happen, I'm gonna catch it and be able to stop it. Whereas if I'm just next to them or in front of them, it's a tactic." And he's like, "Olivia, you never picked up on that?" And I was like, "No, I just thought you decided to stroll behind us instead of next to us." And it was like this
Yeah.
moment of like, oh, that forethought for men, or like what is passed down of like how to look for stuff, especially in military communities, because his father served, is like these are the things you have to do
Mhm.
as a man. But as a woman, it's not like, okay, you have to be looking at all angles all the time, be aware of your surroundings. And my dad has trained us that over the years, like consciously, of like, okay, if you start to notice this is happening, like be aware of it. But even when we got to Alaska, like I've I've shot a gun one other time because I've always like wanted to have that experience. Alaska, it is way more common to shoot guns. It is more of a norm here. And it's also a safety feature in case you're
Right.
out walking on a hike or whatever, and an animal comes up. And
Sure.
my boyfriend goes, "We're going to the range." Like the first thing we did after we moved here was go to the range. And he was
Yeah.
like, because you need to understand gun safety. You need to understand if you are home and something happens, the resources, the tools, how to handle it, this and that. And you need to understand if you're put into a situation, what you could do and look at it as a tactical standpoint of how to operate, what to grab, how to hold it, so you also don't harm yourself. And and I go now to the range all the time, but also I've learned so much of like certain guns, for example. Like I got small hands. I should not be holding certain guns because for my hand grip. And it's like those things where
Yeah.
it's like understanding in a situation where it needs to
Hmm.
be a choice of there is a gun involved, whether you're walking down the street getting robbed or not. Like, how do I handle that? How do I handle it with the resources I have? And I completely agree. It's when you're in those military male dominated environments, it's way more of a norm to talk about and okay to
Hmm.
talk about and
Hmm.
understand because
Hmm.
for them, it's always come from that tactical learning, understanding, implementing process. But in civilian
Hmm.
life and or especially with women, it's like, don't hold a gun, don't do that.
Right.
We're
Right.
not
That's
brought around it.
scary. Yeah. And I think that's a big, when people think of women's empowerment, they think, oh, we have to get women pumped up. We have to make them tougher. And okay, true. However, power the human being's language of power. I say it's like a spectrum. Like picture the speedometer on your car. If your car still has one of those, that goes all the way up and all the way down. And if over here is killing and self-defense, right above that is hunting. You're like pedal to the metal on the gas. The other side is complete altruism, nurturing a baby, rescuing a hurt animal. We have to be capable of extreme gentleness and extreme violence. That empowerment is having full capabilities on that spectrum. And what happens to a lot of people, I think, in our society, based on the way we socialize ourselves and one another, whether you believe it's nature or nurture, it's kind of irrelevant here, because what we're really talking about is fluency. So if you have males who are encouraged to be on that competitive, dominant, opinionated, even violent side of the spectrum, and we get uncomfortable when women start to flow into that space, we expect women to be over here. Vice versa, if our son is over here on the gentle side, you have a lot of people that are trying to push him this way, whereas it's something that we're throttling through in the course of our day. Maybe I rock the baby to sleep, and then I go to the range and I shoot, and then I go to jujitsu class, and then I come home and I take care of a sick grandparent. And we're constantly moving in these spaces. And I think my goal with this training, with the Atalanta Leadership Forge for women specifically, is to help create fluency across the whole spectrum. So I don't want to shut off or discredit or say that the gentle side doesn't matter, because part of what my daughter taught me, really just in her innate nature, I was always growing up what they called a tomboy back then, and I was always outside and always rugged and always athletic, but I love Barbie dolls. I'm kind of like, I'm here. She was always outdoorsy and all that, but she's more gentle and a little quieter than I am, and she's taught me that isn't a lack of strength, because even if her natural set point is over here and that's where she likes to hang out in being gentle and quiet, I can see her step fully on the gas, whether it's, attacking her brother on the trampoline, or, scoring goals in a field hockey game. But that's the part, because I think so many, it's not just women who really need access to this information. You see a lot of it coming out of women's groups and women's spaces where they're running into issues of career advancement. Like, gosh, I'm on a team of all guys. I don't know how to be on this meeting. They say I need more executive function or whatever it is. I need to show up more. I need to speak my mind more. I need to be more confident. How do I convey that in meetings? Maybe there's girls who aren't speaking up in school, or they're afraid to answer questions, or they're afraid to try athletics, or they hang back in PE because the boys are dominating the PE class. And it's getting girls comfortable with the power side. I would say if we're in the plus on the power, the other side, the more gentle side, we're in the negative, which isn't a bad thing. It's beautiful. But we have to be fluent in both, or those deficiencies can put us at risk. Just like if we only know violence, our deficiencies for gentleness put us at risk.
Mhm. And it's
Yeah.
also one of those things where it then trains us to be more observant. Like my father always taught us, like, what's going on around you, like be mindful of
Mm-hmm.
that. And I've my boyfriend tries to like instill that on me too, of like I need like his own comfortability. Like he wants to make sure that when I am alone, especially in different parts, because typically what people don't think about is when military spouses are home alone because their spouse is deployed or whatever it might be, there is no one else protecting them. They have to be able to protect
Right.
themselves. And I remember, like, we do different exercises, whatever, and I was at a grocery store more recently, and my boyfriend was getting gas there. It was a Fred Meyer's. And I walked into the store and I'm like, and there's like two entrances. So I walked in towards the back entrance and it's typically colder here. So it was a cold day, rainy. And there was someone who looked like they could be homeless, drugged out, whatever it might be, sitting in the entrance. And I like picked it as I'm walking by, and I'm like, okay. And I go towards where I need to go, and I'm in the store, and like 5 minutes goes by, and I see this guy out like the corner of my eye walk by my aisle and just staring at me. And I'm like,
Mm-mm.
okay. So then I move a few aisles over because I had heard
Mhm.
people and went into the people aisle. And it was farther down. And then again, I see him like turn because now he's coming back the other way and staring down the aisles. And now those people had left. And I like called my boyfriend. I'm like, okay, I'm not saying this guy means any bad intention, but the fact I've now seen him three separate times, two of them I've caught him eyeing aisles. I'm like, this isn't right. Like, can you come in? And he was like, I'm finishing gas, like as soon as I'm done. And he was like, okay, in this instance, can you get over to the technology area? Because in Fred Meyer, the tech areas, they have the going by to make sure you don't steal stuff. And there's always someone sitting in
Mhm.
there and this and that. And he's like,
That's
can you get
smart.
over there? And like just thinking of those things, I would,
Mm-hmm.
without having the practice and that power of like identifying, but then also going, okay, in a situation without like having an issue, where's the place you can go? But even thinking of that, of like, oh yeah, go to the tech area in a Target or a
Mm-hmm.
Walmart because someone's always going
Mm-hmm.
to be standing there. There's
Mm-hmm.
these certain blocks you don't even. I've never thought of that.
That's a great point. I mean, you're that awareness of your surroundings is something in when we talk about de-escalation or prevention. And Dom, who I work with now, who has his own shows and he talks a lot about personal defense, that's a big piece. Is we're looking at what they say in the law enforcement community is left of bang. So bang is the bad event, and we're not trying to be reactionary. That's a last case scenario. And one of the things people get wrong in like self-defense classes is they'll spend an hour putting women in chokeholds and say, here's how you get out of a chokehold. Well, once you're in one, that's really, really hard, even professional MMA fighters. What we need to do is figure out what chain of events led to getting put in a chokehold. What did we miss? And I've had another instructor who would speak to this effect when he would say, every single person that's ever been assaulted and lived to tell the tale will say, I had a bad feeling when. And so a big piece is teaching us to trust our gut, trust that feeling, and act on it. And what's really interesting for women that has been unfolding in my mind as I've started to go down this path into the women's space, I was listening to Glennon Doyle's podcast, We Can Do Hard Things with Abby Wambach, and she was talking about how much time, I think she was talking about the beauty industry, but she was saying how much women are taught to not trust ourselves, our appetites, our opinions, our bodies. There's so many things in the world. Don't trust your body the way your body naturally ages. Put all these creams on and all this makeup and get all these injections and do all these things because your instinct is wrong. Your body's instinct is wrong. I've written an article on Medium that's about the self-defense tool every woman has and is afraid to use, which is being a bitch. So many women will let themselves get in a bad situation because they're afraid to be looked at as a bitch, as if, and it's as simple as, I'm going into my apartment building and I'm going to shut the locked door behind me and let the guy behind me get his access. If he's allowed to have access, he'll get that access. I'm not holding the door for a stranger, because how many videos do we see from urban environments of some guy following a woman off the subway and into her apartment? Getting off an elevator when someone gives you a bad feeling, shutting your car door and getting back in when you're pumping gas because you have a bad feeling. And so many people are afraid to act on that. But to your credit, you did the right thing. And I think, and this is something I get into a lot with law enforcement too, is the more nuanced, and again, the more capable you are of speaking that language of power, whether we're just right of center and we're saying, hey, I'm going to use my words and be assertive to move out of the situation, or move my feet and my brain and my body to this safer location to get out of this situation. But also know that I'm fluent in the rest of the spectrum. So yes, I have a gun in the car. I know how to shoot it. Maybe I have, like, one of my favorite things I carry is a combat flathead from Dynamis Alliance. It's like a flathead screwdriver. very handy, but can also be used for self-defense. But there's nothing illegal about having it with you. It's just a screwdriver. But okay, I have that. I know how to use it. But I also have fight capabilities and jujitsu training. And I know that in a grappling scenario without a weapon, I might not need to use a weapon. So it sounds very unsavory. People aren't used to hearing women talk like that. But the thing is, and what I try to tell people all the time is, there are 170-pound UFC fighters in my gym, right? Guys who fight at that level. They will turn down a fight with an opponent who can't make weight by 5 pounds. They won't spar with a guy in the gym who outweighs them by 10 pounds. If a professional martial artist won't put their body at risk with that much of a differential between strength and size, why do women think that I'll be able to figure it out with the lollipop stick from my purse? And why do we raise our daughters or let our sisters and our mothers think that that's enough preparation and training? And the crazy part is, and this is where women say, well, my life is safe. I don't go anywhere. I don't need to know that, Alice. And that I totally respect that. However, the other piece that, again, and this is something women don't talk about that comes over from the military law enforcement side, is that's called stress inoculation training. So everything over here that you know how to do that you might hopefully will never need to use in your life prepares you for these lesser engagements up here. If I know that I can armbar a guy in jujitsu class, speaking up in a meeting isn't that scary. Disagreeing with a man in a professional or academic environment doesn't feel so threatening. My heart doesn't race so much because that's not even close to the scariest thing. I know that I can get punched by a man and punch harder in the gym sometimes, It's really, really important. That's what I mean by that fluency.
And I love that. And that kind of transformation that we've been talking about doesn't happen by accident. It takes intention, structure, trust, habits, like we've talked about. What are some of the key tools or principles you use in your programs that help women and leaders of all kinds build that resilience and lead with authenticity and comfortability to know, like, in these moments, I have the tools I need?
That's a good question. I think there has to be deliberate action and there has to be awareness. And I'm really big on self-awareness and humility. And those, I think, are two things we don't always talk about enough. It's funny because I was driving as she had a long road trip bringing my daughter back from a tournament. And I was in a zone because I had to get back home to get to my son's tournament. I'm in that sports mom era. So I'm driving along and my mind was wandering. And I guess I was not going as fast as some people wanted me to go in the fast lane. I was still going 85 and a 70, but all these maniacs were like going around me and pointing, like mansplaining kind of dramatic gestures. So it started to hit me and I was like, oh, I'm like that person in the organization with blinders on who wants to do it the way I do it because this is how it's always been done. I'm not willing to hear anyone's opinion. I don't want to ever consider someone else's idea that might advance the mission or advance the organization. I just want to be right. And that's endemic in government organizations like the VA where I used to work, which is why I see it all the time in law enforcement because of the structure of some of those organizations. But again, that's what's shown me something that we carry over. It's applicable, it's universal. It applies to third graders on a softball team, which is, do you have the humility and the willingness to see where you're the problem? Like, am I the a-hole here? You see those Facebook groups, am I the a-hole? And people ask that, and it's so funny. And it's like, or you hear them say, if you're looking around the room and you can't figure out who the a-hole is, it's probably you. Like, we're not good at reframing situations and seeing, is that me? But that's, I think, where the real work gets done. What's so funny is that endeavor to sort of unearth that concept, it started as me facing out to the world, like, let me figure out these annoying, frustrating people so I can take it to my leadership classes and teach it to people. But the more I did that, the more I catch myself and I'm like, I'm guilty. Like, do not cast the first stone. I have a lot of work to do. And
I think that's what I think we all have to remember sometimes as consultants, as coaches, as speakers, is that, like, you don't have to be perfect, but 9 times out of 10, everything we talk about and our knowledge come from some form of experience, and we need to acknowledge that experience to be able to go, oh yeah, like, this makes sense, right? I was having conversation earlier and we were talking about something, and to me, like, in the podcasting space, it made 110% like of course
Mm,
this flows, like this wouldn't be detrimental knowledge for anyone. And the person stopped me and they're like, that's what you needed to lead with. That sentence right there, you started that in the beginning of our conversation, like would have we would have gotten here like 10 times faster. I'm like, wait, that was the
mm,
key? I'm like, that part of it,
mm,
that experience? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I've been there. We
mm,
gotta, you know, reframe, but understanding that like those moments we go
mhm,
through and the will help play into everything, especially when we're talking
mhm,
to other females. I've worked in a lot
mhm,
of male dominated industries before starting my business, and I still have conversations
mhm,
with people where I'm the only female at the table or I'm the leader at the
mhm,
table, right?
mhm,
I'm the president of the state of Connecticut board. When I joined, I was one of two females, and then female was not showing up to anything. So I was really the only female. There was also a very big gap in age and experience between me and everyone else at the table. And a few years later, I became the president. They called me up. They're like, we want you to become the president. So now you're going to be the head of the table. But I still had to understand that even though I was the head of the table, I needed to be able to communicate and like show my like this is the time where we can have discussion and be open. This is the time for you to be quiet and listen. And I love how you bring up like that inner bitch because I feel like sometimes, especially when you have a seat at a table, you're scared to use
mhm,
that because you don't want people to think the wrong way. Whereas like
mhm.
I've come to learn it as like yeah, it's my last resort, but you're really going to learn when that comes out where we stand.
Yeah,
Like you're going to
yeah,
know. And like I'm
yeah.
not going to be scared to tell you that because a lot of times other people at the table are not going to care about your feelings. They're going to say it straight. And if it ends up hurting your feelings, then you have a discussion about it after. But sometimes the word around it, right? Females deem it
Mhm,
bitchy. Males do
mhm,
not think of it that way. It's being
mhm.
straightforward, it's being concise, right? There's these different words where sometimes
Right.
it's think about that, like in
Yeah,
itself.
yeah.
Um,
And it's something you're really skilled at already, I think, because your career, your entire business is bringing intimate information out of different people from different backgrounds. So you're very fluent in that type of emotional intelligence, I think. Um, but I was just reading, it was an article in Harvard Business Review, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it was neat. It was one of those things I earmarked, like, oh, I got to use this in the future. I have to. She was talking about different languages of power. It's almost like power and submission. It made me think of my dogs in the workplace and saying, there was a table, and it was like, this is the list of power behaviors. So, for example, if someone else is talking and I'm like not paying attention, and I'm like, and doing this, that's actually an expression of dominance. It's a little bit dismissive, and it's like, oh, you're not that important. However, that can be perceived as positive. That helps. There's certain things that give people status, like at the board table. But then the flip side is there are other things that like are appeasement moves, kind of the way dogs will roll and show their belly. And you don't want to do too much of it, but you have to do some to be likable. Like leaders who only live on this side are viewed as domineering, and on this side, they're viewed as too weak. So again, it's back to that power continuum I was talking about, but that fluency. But what was interesting was at the end of the article, there was this little blurb like, by the way, if you're a woman or a minority, it's 10 times harder for you because now people have all these other assumptions about you that they're bringing to the table. And now it's not that you're not speaking the same language. So behaviors that are deemed appropriate, and they study all this. I mean, this has all been studied, that deemed appropriate and acceptable and confident from a man, like you just said, they're viewed as bitchy, domineering, disagreeable for a woman. And so we really do have our work cut out for us. It's a tough thing.
when you go and speak to women teams, women CEOs, women groups, how do you start out by saying some of these trades you have more work for to do? Like how do you express that to say you can have these tools, we need to implement it, you need to own, find your voice, own your voice, do these certain things, but it could like you have the power to do that, just also understand that it could be perceived one way and how to use those actions, especially with women of younger
Mhm.
ages, where it's like having those tools and resources built in at a younger age can empower them and change
Mhm.
even the trajectory of their life.
Yeah, it's a good question. I I think about that a lot with my athletes in field hockey, and it's a very again individualized approach that it really takes when you're a leader. It takes truly caring about people and knowing their story and where they're coming from. But it takes me back to a lesson that J.C. Blick and I wrote about in there's a book back there called Meditations of an Army Ranger, but it was a concept that JC was using in the Army and in Ranger Battalion that carries over, which is he would say opportunity doors are different sizes for different people, but there's a door. Your door may be itty bitty if you grew up a little kid on the street whose mom was addicted to drugs and you made it to Harvard and now you run a hedge fund. It was hard as hell because the door you started with was so tiny, but there are people that have those stories. And then the flip side is you might have been born a Kennedy on Nantucket and you want to go to Dartmouth. That's a gigantic opportunity door. Welcome to Dartmouth, Kennedy. And what JC says, and he makes a wonderful point, is you can cry about the size of your opportunity door all day, but it doesn't change anything. We have to be action oriented and take emotion out of the equation. And this is something, again, that goes into the things girls get socialized about versus this practical results oriented mindset that you get from an Army Ranger, lieutenant colonel, which is what he's telling me. But it's a great point of view. It's like, okay, some athletes naturally can run infinitely. Great, good for them. Field hockey is easy for them. I have other kids who have to work and work for every step and but the victories for those kids are so sweet and so incredible. Like I'm thinking of one athlete I've had for the last couple of years who's been that way, where they always felt like more of a theater kid and interested in athletics and loving the social aspect, but not necessarily fully stepping into their power as an athlete and saying, I'm an athlete. But they had the best attitude in the world, and a great work ethic. And this child made such vast improvements, like fighting for every step. But the mindset was there and the will was there. And that's the piece. We can it's a quick slippery slope into victim mentality if you look at an opportunity door and start to cry about why my opportunity door is not different. That's where those conversations of equity and equality start to come in. And that is a dangerous conversation, I think, especially for younger generations who've been raised up on the concept of equity, which is as nice as that is. And if you're fortunate, you grow up in environments that work hard to make things equitable for you and lift you up when you're at a disadvantage. The world might not always work that way. And we can't let that stop us. That's what empowerment means, that the power's back in your hands. It's like, the locus of control isn't over there with the people who are oppressing me. It's with me. I have the power. It might suck. It might be a horrible situation. I might hate every step of the way. I might be bitter and mad that it's easier for other people. Or I can let that stuff go and just be like, let's go. This is my mountain to climb. I don't know how other people are struggling, because that Kennedy who wants to go to Dartmouth that I was just talking about, maybe he's got dyslexia and maybe he's struggling with an autoimmune disease and he's got a lot of things, family issues going on behind the scenes. So what looks like a really easy path has a different mountain to climb that we can't see. We got to stay fixed on our mountain and doing, I love from Frozen, doing the next right thing, taking the next step, you know?
And I love that. And it's even something I've talked about in my TED Talk, defeating your biggest enemy, you, is there's always that mountain, right, to climb. And there are those different battles that you have to win and become the victor of to end up winning the whole thing. And that being said, Alice, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
They can go to Atalanta Leadership. So I'll just spell it because it's hard. It's Atalanta Leadership Forge, FORGE.com. And on there, you've got my phone number, you've got my email, if you call, you're going to get me. I want to talk to you. I want to get to know you. You can find me on LinkedIn with Alice Atalanta, spelled the same way. You can find me on Instagram as well. The Leadership Forge is on there, and Alice Atalanta as well. So whatever way works best for you. But I'm very flexible in terms of how I engage with people, because I want to meet the needs of their organizations and their teams. So there's a lot of ways I can help, and I'm happy to talk about those.
And what we'll do too is put all of the contact information that Alice just mentioned in the description, so you can immediately just click and go and get in contact with her. Thank you, Alice, for all of your insight today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. You're awesome, and your show is fantastic. So thanks, Olivia.
Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed the conversation, and it's a very important conversation to have. And there's many, I typically say there's a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation. There are a few of those key takeaways from today's conversation, but there's quite a few today. So the hardest thing is getting your feet wet. That first step, and this is what Alice talked about in the beginning, is really just getting your feet wet to then go in the ebbs of flow. But that first step is getting your feet wet. As well as she brought up, it's not that it's complicated, but it's challenging to create the habit. The habit does not need to be challenging. Alice brought up the idea and concept of getting healthy, having a diet, being on a schedule. Those aren't challenging or complicated tasks to achieve, right? The healthiness and the working out that Alice brought up, they're challenging because you have to do it every day. And it's those aspects of leaning into the challenge of actually doing it every day that will then create the habit. As well as woman empowerment is having capabilities on all aspects of the spectrum. Alice brought this up continuously throughout the day, the more empathy side, the more powerful, dominating side. And it isn't just about being dominant in one area of that. It's being able to understand, as she brought up throughout our conversation today, when to use what aspect and when to lean into what aspect as well as what chain of events led to the chokehold. Trust your grit. I love how Alice brought this up, is sometimes you don't want to be reactive, right? And that's the analogy that Alice used with the chokehold of what could I've done? When did I get that gut feeling? To what, and like, how could that have pivoted? Whereas what, as you're going through those chain of events, listening to your gut, going, okay, what can I do to prevent this? Can I go into this space? What tools do I have at my resources in case something escalates? Because like she said, even men who don't want to fight 10 pounds, someone 10 pounds higher than them, why do you think that not doing anything proactively would be the same event? Their proactiveness is deciding not to fight, right? So leaning into that, as well as every woman's defense tool for women, it's just leaning sometimes to being a bitch. Like, it's okay. That is something we all have within us. And men, I know you got it too. So like, let's be honest, it's something. I love how Alice brought this up, because the word and the way it's associated can be deemed as a negative, or those small actives get associated with that negative connotation, when in reality, it can be something easy, accessible for us to do when we're not comfortable with how a situation might play out. Then if we just lean into, we will always have that within us. As well as empower means the power is back in your hands. And the challenge I want to leave our listeners with today too is, how are you holding the power in your hands, personally and professionally? And how can you get that power in your hands? This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Dr. Alice Atalanta. Thank you for listening, and have a successful day.